I am Tamika Lodge Fenton, and I'll be guiding you through City and Guilds mathematics. In today's lesson, we'll be focusing on conversions between common fractions, decimal fractions, and percentages. Let's begin. So, after you would have looked at this, at the end of the entire unit, you should be able to understand how to recognize equivalences of common fractions, decimal fractions, and percentages, and converting common fractions to decimal fractions. At the end of this session, you will be able to recognize the equivalences of common fractions, decimal fractions, and percentages involving common fractions with denominators 2, 4, 5, 10, and 100. So let us do a little review. Percentage. A percent is another way to compare parts of a whole. A percent is a ratio in which the first term is compared to 100. That's one way of looking at it. Another way, when you say the word percent, what you're really saying is per 100, all right? So let's look at a few diagrams. So a percent can be expressed as a decimal fraction or a common fraction. Let us look at a half. A half can be written as a percentage. It's 50%. Now remember, we said that percent is per 100. So if you are looking at half, it would be half of the 100, which is 50. So it's 50%. A decimal is still half. It's represented as a decimal. It would be 0.5, or what we say, 5/10. It's 5/10, all right? And then you have, as a fraction, you know that representation already, symbolic representation of a fraction is a half. So what we're saying, when you're comparing part of a whole, you can either use a percentage, a decimal fraction, or a common fraction. Let us continue. Let us look here now. We have a rectangular shape here, and it is divided into 100 parts. Now, all of the parts are shaded, so we can pretty much say 100% of this rectangular shape is shaded. Simply means, what if the whole was not 100 though? What if the whole was 80? So you'd pretty much want to find out what is 100% of 80. To represent 100% as a fraction is 100 out of 100. And then you multiply that by whatever the whole is. In this instance, it's 80. So 100% of 80, obviously, guys, it's 80. Great. What about 50%? 50%, remember, we just looked at that previously. It's a half. Therefore, a half of 100 is 50. So to represent 50% as a fraction, it's really 50 out of 100. And of course, as we progress, you'll realize that we can simplify 50/100th. You don't have to write it like that. We can definitely find common factors and write it in a simpler fractional representation. So 50/100th of whatever the whole is, in this case it's 80, is 40. And you can reason that out. If you have $80, half of it is $40. And half is still 50%. Excellent. And as you can see, the diagram here illustrates that half of the 100 blocks have been shaded. So far you should realize that there are three ways in which we're representing parts of a whole. What if you have 5%? What is that? It's really 5/100ths. It means that you have 5 out of 100 parts shaded or talking about. Now, what if the whole isn't 100? What if the whole is 80? So it's 5% of 80, which is 5/100ths of 80. And you would multiply and you'd get it's 4. So what we'd have done is find factors to simplify 5/100ths multiplied by 80. All right, so when you look at fractions, what are you really saying? Or percentage. So 75% really is 75/100ths, and 100% is 100/100ths. And 200 would be 200/100ths. And yes, we have 200%. That means you would double it. 100% is really, if you say 100% of 5, it's 5. 100% of your family, that means all of them gone. If it's 200% of 100, clearly you're going to double 100, so it's going to be 200. Awesome. So those are just to look back on some of the things that you would have done. And you know this already. So now let's look at a quarter. If you were to represent a quarter as a fraction, a common fraction, a decimal fraction, a percentage. So as you can see, our illustration, this whole is divided into 4 equal parts, and you're looking at one part of it. So it's 1 quarter, 1 out of the 4 parts. As a decimal, it's 0.25. Now, if you remember that a quarter would be, if you're looking at 0 to 1, 0 to 1, then you'd have a quarter would be, let's go on the board a little. I don't want you to lose how I get. Let's look at a quarter. So if I have a quarter here, and I want to make it a decimal fraction, all right, I can do one of two things. So I can look at a number line, and I can start at 0, and I have 1. So if you look at where half would be, you'd realize that between half and 0, you'd have your quarter, which is your 0.25. Beyond this, between the half mark and 1, the half mark between that, I should say, is 0.75. All right, and you can see here we have a quarter, half, 3/4, and the whole. So remember, your common fractions, your decimal fractions, your percentages, it's ways in which you can compare a part to a whole. So we're still looking at a part of a whole. A quarter. Now, to convert a quarter, which is a common fraction, to a decimal fraction, one of the things we could do is to find the equivalent fraction of it in terms of hundreds, powers of 10. Now, we know that 4 is not a factor of 10, but 4 is a factor of 100. So let's see what happens. 4 divided into 100 goes 25 times. So 25, why am I using 25 to multiply the 1? That means I would have had to multiply 4 by 25 to get it to 100. And you should now know that once you are finding an equivalent fraction, whatever is done to the denominator must be done to the numerator. So I have to do the same thing. So 4 is now 100. So 100 multiplied by 25 give me 25. So what I'm saying is a quarter is equivalent to 25 hundredths. Now, we would have done place value, and you would have remembered that if you say 25 hundredths, you know exactly where to put it. So your decimal point here, this is your tenths place, and this is your hundredths place. So this is how you would call it. 0.25 is actually 25 hundredths. So right away, by looking at the fractional representation in terms of powers of tens or hundredths here, you now know that this is 0.25 or 25 hundredths. And of course, quarter of 100 is 25%. Let us continue. Let us look at this one, a tenth, 1/10. So as you can see, the diagram is a rectangular box, 100 parts, 10 out of it has been shaded. Now remember, 1/10, that means the whole is divided into 10 parts. So although you have 100 tiny boxes, you can then further divide it into 10 parts by putting 10 into each part. Hence, the 10% would be 10 out of the 100, which can be simplified. So let us look. If you simplify 10 hundredths, it's actually 1/10. So if you look at the pizza, it is 1/10 of the pizza that is highlighted there. And if you look at the number line, you can see that it is 0.1, which is 1/10. So what would have happened here? Between 0 and 1, they have divided it into 10 equal parts. And the first part would be 1/10, which is the same as 0.1, which is called 1/10. All right. Here we go with 1/5. No. So 1/5, 5. So this pizza is divided into 5 parts. It is not a fractional representation with the powers of 10, but it can be converted. So let's do that on the board. So you have 1/5, and we're going to look at converting that 1/5. So we know that 5 is a factor of 10. So if we have 5 as a factor of 10, we can find an equivalent fraction for 1/5. So 1/5, and we know that we're going to want the new denominator to be 10. What would you have to do to 5 to get it to 10? Multiply it by 2. And remember, I just said you must do it for both the numerator and the denominator. So 5 multiplied by 2 gives us 10. 2 multiplied by 1 gives us 2. So 1/5 is equivalent to 2/10, right? 2/10, as you can see, 0.2 is 2/10. So that is how we now know that we are on the right track. So that's 2/5. So 2/5, if you have 1/5 as 0.2, 2/5 clearly is 0.4 or 4/10. Let's not say 0.2, let's use 4/10. Let's actually call it what it is. All right, and then that's 40%. So let's look at this one before we go to our exam questions. You have 47 hundredths. So it's really, you would have had your whole divided into 100 parts, and you'd have selected 47 parts of it. I mean, it can't get simpler than that. So you have 47%, because it's actually a whole is 100. And if you were to look on your number line again, you would have then therefore divided your number line from 0 to 1 into 100 parts, and you would have been at 47/100th part of it. All right. So you can simplify as you go along with other fractions. Let's move on to some exam questions. So a cake is cut into 10 slices. 4 slices are eaten. What is the number as a percentage of the cake? So how many slices the cake was cut into? 10. How many slices are they talking about? 4 of those 10 slices. Let's just put a fractional representation for that first. So you have 4/10 of the cake is eaten. So that is the fractional representation of it. That's the common fraction. Let us make a decimal, and then we go to the percentage. So this would be 4/10, and we know how to write 4/10. So it would be 0.4. Now, as a fraction, as a percentage, what does that look like? All right, so we have 4/10. Can we find an equivalent fraction for 4/10 in terms of 100? Yes, 10 is a factor of 100. 10 divided into 100 goes 10 times. So that means I'd have to multiply both numerator and denominator by 10. 10 tens, 100. 10 fours, 40. This is 40 hundredths. That means that is 40%. All right, so it's 4 slices and it's 40%. Next question. A quality inspector checks a batch of 50 shirts. And those 50 shirts, out of those 50 shirts, 4 of the shirts fail the quality check. So you know you're a quality assurance personnel, and you're ensuring that these shirts go out in good condition. Now, after checking 50, 4 of them did not meet the standard. What is the number as a percentage of the batch? So let's write the fractional representation first. So it is 4 of the 50, so it's 450. Can we simplify this in any way? We could, or we could represent it in terms of 100, since you're being asked to find a percentage. So of course, your equivalent sign, 50 is a factor of 100, so 50 divided into 100 goes 2 times. So we know that's what we would have done to the 50 to get it to 100. And you must do the very same thing to your numerator. So we have 800ths, and the percentage that represents 800ths is 8%. All right. So, or we could have done 4/50th of, what was the whole? 50, right? 100%, sorry, 8, it's the same thing, right, of 50. Oh, we said 8%? No, it's already 4. We know it's 4 already. We can't do that. I'm going to find 4 again. That's okay. So it's 8%. So let's look at that. So what's the whole here? 50 is the whole, yes. 4/50th multiplied by 100 gives us 8%, right? Option A. All right. What is 75% expressed as a fraction? So we're at 75% expressed as a fraction. This should be a little bit easier for you to do now, because you know that if you have 75%, the fraction you're looking at is 75 hundredths, because fraction is per 100. So 75 hundredths. But do you see 75 hundredths there? No, you don't. So simply means that you have to simplify this. When you're simplifying, remember that you need to find a factor both common to the numerator and the denominator. What is, you can start simply if you want. You could use 5 to factor both the numerator, but for time, the highest common factor here is 25. So 25 divided into 75 goes 3 times. That means we can get 3 groups of 25 from 75. How many $25 you can get from $100? Exactly. That would be 4. So that means our equivalent fraction here is 3/4. So 75% is the same as saying 3/4. All right? Awesome. And we have our final question for the afternoon. What is 2/5 as a decimal fraction? So we're just going to go to this side here. 2/5 as a decimal fraction. We want to get it to, let's express it in terms of 100. What 5 into 100 goes? 20 times. So we would have multiplied that by 20, that by 20. That would have given us, what are we expressing as? Right. So that's 40 hundredths. 40 hundredths, we know that the first place would be our tenths place. So if it says 40 hundredths, you would have to write it to the hundredths place. And yes, so your option C would be your correct. So 4 tenths, that's the first place. Right, great.